All right, so welcome to another Austin School dystopian nightmare. This is going to be the World War II Part 2. We're not actually going to get to World War II today, but we're going to do the interwar period. So last semester I did Part 1, and I got us to the end of World War I, which I was really happy about. And so this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up there, because even though we technically ended wow, that is getting really loud. Can you guys hear me okay? Should I just power through? It's a little distracting, but this is the problem with glass ceilings. Let's just, since you guys can hear me, I'm just going to power through and we'll see what happens. All right, so when World War I ends, it actually leaves the world in a bit of turmoil for multiple reasons. First of all, the ending is extremely messy. So the German military surrenders. When it does, its allies obviously go with it too. It only had 3 allies. They were, of course, Bulgaria, the Ottoman Empire, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. For the record, as a general rule, don't go to war if Bulgaria is your ally. They lose. Like that's one of the states on the planet that doesn't have a great track record. Like, don't get me wrong, they did technically win the Balkans War of 1912. The problem is that made the Balkans War of 1913 happen, and they lost that. So, like, they win a war and it triggers another war that causes them to lose. So even winning, they still lose. So, having said that, what happens is, right before the war ends, there's a little bit of turmoil. Austria, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, actually disintegrates. So during World War I, something really amazing happens. Germany defeats Russia. So you don't get to say that in a sentence very often, that somebody defeated Russia. The Mongols defeated the Russians, the Vikings tore the Russians up and then created Russia. And Germany defeated Russia in World War I. The surrender terms the Germans got were actually really good. They got to carve off a huge chunk of the western part of the Russian Empire. Land-wise, I'm making this number up, but maybe it was 10%, but in terms of population, it was closer to a quarter of the population. It's absolutely devastating for the Russian Empire. It included the industrial centers of the Russian Empire, which meant that the Russian Empire's economic output dramatically collapsed. And also it was the breadbasket of the Russian Empire. The Germans got, first of all, Finland had already broken away, so that wasn't actually technically part of it. They got Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Belarus, and Ukraine, and then what we call today Moldova, but at the time it was Bessarabia. So they got this massive chunk of land. That's actually one of the reasons why the Germans lose. The Germans decide that they're going to actually try to occupy and control that land. And what they try to do is they try to get it so that the ethnic German minorities in that territory end up ruling. They actually take members of German royal family and send them to some of these states to try to create German governments for these places. Wow, it's getting louder. I feel like it's applause. I'm going to treat this like applause. I'm going to go ahead and wait a little bit. Are we ready? Okay, let's do this. Okay, so World War I ends, but it doesn't end neatly, right? It ends up creating a really big mess. And the mess is for multiple reasons. One of the problems is Germany really didn't lose World War I militarily. Germany lost World War I economically. It literally ran out of food. So when the war ends, the Russians have surrendered. They've chopped off the western part of the Russian Empire. Per acre, it's the best real estate of the empire. It has massive amounts of industry and food. And then the entire war on the Western Front is fought in France and in Italy. And in fact, in 1918, in spring of 1918, the Germans launched the spring offensive and try to capture Paris. So 4 years into the war, the Germans are still attacking. They still have the resources to do this. Running out of food is not great because starving soldiers are awful soldiers. And so Germany is literally coming apart at the seams. Austria, in October, breaks up with Hungary. They break the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and it becomes increasingly obvious that they're not gonna get through to the other side. They're not going to win. So the Germans go and they say, we want to negotiate. We want to see if we can't just do an armistice, surrender. Because we're winning militarily, they tell the French and the British, could you just be a little merciful with us, right? We might have a little bit of fight left in us. It's just things are coming apart. And they tell the Brits and the French, we're worried we're going to end up with a communist revolution like the Russians. The path that we're on is leading us in that direction. You really need to let us surrender and not really hurt us for it. So of course the British and the French, they're thinking, oh, we're gonna so hurt you. We're gonna get the biggest ounce of vengeance imaginable because well, first of all, we're rivals. You have to remember in World War I, there's no good guys. There's no bad guys. Everybody is equally bad. I mean, there are bad guys, it's everybody. The reason World War I breaks out is because the Germans don't think they got enough of the world. They feel like they should have more. In other words, they feel like because they start late, they didn't get enough of Africa. They didn't get enough of Asia. And they feel cheated in creating an empire. The British are nervous that if the Germans are allowed to keep building their navy, at some point German quality, because they're not going to match the Brits for quantity, but at some point German quality will reach a level where they'll be able to fight the Brits and sink the British Navy. So for them, the reason for World War I is to preemptively stop the Germans. In other words, it's two really bad guys competing for the world's resources that they don't want to pay for. They're in plunder mode. The empires aren't about advancing the countries they conquer, right? The stat I keep throwing out is, when the British began conquering India, India accounted for 23% of the world's GDP. When India got its independence, it was 4% of the world's GDP. What the British Empire did was it industrialized itself at the expense of its empires, the colony in its empires, like especially India, but all of them. So in other words, Germany wants to have the opportunity to have that kind of plunder. For the British, this is neutralizing their number one threat. So they're not going to be merciful. Having said that, everybody's trying to figure out how everybody who's losing is trying to figure out how they're going to crash land. So before the Ottoman Empire surrenders, right, it forces the Russians, because the Russians are forced to surrender, it actually managed to carve off a little chunk of land that they had lost in a previous war to Russia. So ironically, Turkey still has that today. In other words, they kind of set themselves up so that, yeah, they're going to lose the rest of the empire. They're going to lose the Arab part of the empire, or not all of it, but most of it. But then they still got this little piece added to them. That piece was ruled by Armenians and Georgians. So it was a setback for the Armenians and the Georgians, but of course the Turks don't care at that moment. For Austria, they're trying to figure out how they want to land on the other side, and the way they're thinking is the following. So to create Germany, the Prussians, the Kingdom of Prussia, had to do 3 wars. The third war ends in 1871. That's when Germany is created. So Germany is a really young state.
Is it younger? Does that mean it's younger than Texas?
It's younger than the United States. The United States of America is 95 years older than the German state. You're young when the United States is almost 100 years older than you, right? That's the definition of young. When Germany is created in the 1800s, the first country it has to fight, 1864, is Denmark. And actually what's interesting is Denmark actually technically attacked it by invading a chunk of Schleswig-Holstein in order to take more of it. The Prussians counterattack and they end up punking the Danes. And then the Germans turn around and they fight the Austrians, and then they turn around and they fight the French, and they defeat the French. When they fought the Austrians, they beat the Austrians. The reason they fought Austria wasn't because they didn't like Austria. It's because what is today the southern part of the Federal Republic of Germany, so like Baden-Württemberg and Bavaria, those were vassal states to the Austrians. So if Germany was going to get that piece of Germany and make it part of their state, they needed to get the Austrians out. So they fought the Austrians. But you got to remember, Austrians are Germans. So it was German versus German. It was a really weird event. It was, in the minds of many, nothing other than a civil war. When Austria is defeated, the Germans had three options on the table. So Bismarck, right, the architect that's creating Germany, he has to go through and think through the three options. He can't just pick one. There's no obvious immediate answer. One was to just annex the whole thing and make the Austro-Hungarian Empire part of the German Empire. It would have dramatically increased the size of Germany. It would have dramatically increased its resources. But that's not what the Germans were out to do in Europe. They did want to carve off a chunk of Africa. They did want to get into the Pacific Islands. Right there, they do want to have an empire, but they're nervous about having the empire too big in Europe because Austria-Hungary was a German-ruled state, but in a partnership with the Hungarians. But the Germans are a minority in that state. That state had Slovaks and Czechs and Slovenians and Poles and Ruthenians and Ukrainians and Romanians and Italians, right? And Friulians and Romansh and Ladino, and like there's all these different little groups. Some of them are tiny and you've never heard of them, and some of them are huge. And the Germans don't want all those guys because their goal is to create a nation state. So a state is a state that doesn't necessarily care about a specific nationality. A nation state is a state that says we are here because we are the state for that nation. We represent that nation, we protect its interests, we advance its interests. So the Federal Republic of Germany is a nation state for the German nation. You don't have to be a nation state. When you think about the United States, we're not a nation state. I know people always say we are, but we're not a nation state because, at least on paper, our goal is to be a welcoming to all immigrants to help, get rid of the Native Americans. So we embrace, and then what we really meant was white nations, and then the definition of white kept changing. What we really meant when we first started saying white nations was, Germans and Dutch and English and Scots and the Scandinavians. And then, as time went by, okay, maybe the French too. It's a little iffy, and the Belgians. And then, as time went by, we kept expanding the definition of what white was. So there was a nation state element to it, but it was a fuzzy nation. Whereas Japan, it's very clear. It's for Japan. Korea, it's very clear. It's for the Koreans, right? And usually when that's the case, when you have a nation state, it's at the expense of your minorities that aren't from that nation state. And the Germans already had a big minority that they already detested and hated. So Poland is to Germany as Mexico is to the United States. Oh my God, it was driving the Germans nuts. In the 19th century, Germany decided, this brand new German state, it decided to try to expel its Polish population. It said, there's 6 million Poles here, we don't want them. And they began a campaign that lasted, I want to say a decade, it might have been less, might have been more, but it was quite a few years to try to expel the Poles. By the time they were done with this campaign that they spent, in today dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars on trying to deport the Poles, they actually did manage to lower the overall population by 30,000. So instead of being 6 million, it was 5,970,000. Like they made no meaningful impact. They wasted a bunch of resources, but they engendered all this hate because they kept going, oh my God, these immigrants, look at them taking our job. Oh, that's so familiar. So for Bismarck, the idea of annexing the Austro-Hungarian Empire is off the table. He doesn't want all these non-Germans. So then option two is cut Austria out of Austria-Hungary, leave Austria-Hungary, the rest of it, for the Hungarians, especially because the Germans pretty much got along with the Hungarians. Ethnically, there's no similarity. Linguistically, there's no similarity. But after the Hungarian revolt and the deal that the Austrians made with the Hungarians to co-rule the empire, there was kind of an understanding established. And it's not like Hungary was new to the region. There was long cultural ties. So that was an option. Carve Austria out, annex it into Germany, and then leave the rest for Hungary, sign a treaty of alliance with them, and move on. Bismarck ultimately decided it was really cool that there were two German states. There was a German state that was, unfortunately, had a lot of Poles, but if you ignored the Poles, it was a German state for the Germans. And then there was a German state to colonize the lesser parts of Europe. And then maybe over time, Germanize those parts. And there were German colonies throughout the Austro-Hungarian Empire, all the way into what is today Romania. For the record, there were German settlements that went all the way into the Russian Empire, all the way to the Volga River. So there were Germans in Hungary, there were Germans in Poland, there were Germans in the Baltic states. The Germans sort of had the attitude that we had, only they weren't as successful at killing the native population. And so they just sort of would create colonies within. And so you had this population of Germans that stretched from the Volga all the way to the Volga River. So for Germany, they were thinking, okay, maybe this is the way to go. We'll leave Austria-Hungary, we'll make them our friends, and we'll move on. Well, now Austria-Hungary has literally broken in two, and it's collapsing. So Germany surrenders November 11 at 11 a.m. That's when everybody surrenders. The Austrians decide that's the moment. They don't secede from the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It doesn't exist. They already broke it. They secede from Austria. Austria secedes from the Austrian part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. What they did was they just basically figured out where the large German populations were. They drew a line through that and they pulled that out. That was Austria, what's today Austria, a chunk of land called Sudetenland. Sudetenland is, if you go to the Czech Republic or Czechia today, it's basically just everything that borders Germany in a very thin band. And then several German majority cities inside the Czech Republic, like Pilsen. They annexed all of that, or they said we're keeping all of that, and then Südtirol and part of Italy, and then part of what is today Slovenia. And they said, and they named this the Republic of German Austria. Their thinking was, after the surrender treaty, they would then immediately apply for membership in Germany, and that would be the end of the confusion about whether they needed to be two German states, because there was no point, because Austria had already lost its non-German holdings. By this point, what will become Yugoslavia has already broken away, and it becomes the Kingdom of Serbia, Kingdom of the Serbs, the Croats, and the Slovenes. Eventually they'll rename themselves Yugoslavia. And they actually attack Austria, and they're trying to cut off a piece. So World War I is essentially over, and a little war has broken out. And then something else happens. When Russia surrenders to the Germans spell out that there's going to be an Estonia, a Latvia, a Lithuania. But then afterwards, the Germans start to rethink it, and they think, why don't we just create a kingdom of Lithuania? We'll force Estonia and Latvia into it, and we'll put a German king on the throne and be done with it. They say there's going to be a Ukraine and a Belarus, and then they're going to do similar things. That's their goal. Those places will turn into a nightmare for the Germans because they're stuck now trying to control them. What they probably should have done, hindsight is 2020, is just pull their army out and sent it to France to beat the French and the British and let those chunks of the land go, and they should have just been grateful the Russians quit the war. But their thinking was there's a lot of food there's a lot of economy there. If they can extract that, it'll put them into this really powerful position. Having said that, one of the chunks of land that they pulled off that they don't mention in the surrender treaty with the Russians is Poland. For obvious reasons, they've got this ethnic Polish thing going on. So they left Poland off the list, but they created the Kingdom of Poland anyway. They put a German on the throne. Interestingly enough, the Germans opened a Polish language university in Warsaw. So they almost look like good guys in this moment. What ends up becoming Poland is strictly the land they took from the Russian Empire. But Austria had a piece of Poland, Germany had a piece of Poland. So they're not putting Poland together, they're not giving up their pieces, they're just taking the Russian piece and they're making that the new Poland. So Germany surrenders, that new Poland goes, we're too small, we need to be bigger. And they begin attacking their neighbors. They attack the Ukraine, for example, and try to carve off a piece of Ukraine. Their goal is to capture the city of Lviv. So if you've been listening to the war reports from the war that's going on right now, you'll hear, oh, we're in Lviv, the furthest city from the combat zone. That city was Lvov. It was captured by the Poles. And the Poles annexed it into Poland by going to war with Ukraine. So World War I has ended, and all of a sudden there's wars breaking out, right? This isn't a clean ending. This is a new start, and the states are trying to figure out what to do. By the way, the Poles attack the Russians too. They attack the Czechs as well. They even launch 3 attacks into Germany because they just don't want to be cramped into this little space. The Czech war, I think, lasted like 7 days. And they agreed to arbitration. They're fighting over a piece of Germany that the world has decided shouldn't be part of Germany anymore. It's the very southernmost tip of Silesian, but they didn't make it clear who it was supposed to belong to. It was by population about 2/3 Polish, about 1/3 Czech. So the Czechs and the Poles fight it out. International committee figures out what to do with this little piece. They gave about 2/3 of the population to the Czechs, but it was about maybe 20% of the land. But it was the densely populated part. But that meant that they left about 1/2 of the Poles in that area in the Czech, what will become Czechoslovakia, in the Czech-controlled territory. Like, these are the types of disputes that are breaking out. There are these little disputes, but also some big ones. In the meantime, the Allies are coming up with the terms for the surrender. So for Germany, it's the Treaty of Versailles. For Austria, it's going to be the Treaty of Saint-Germain. And they're not being kind. So a piece of Schleswig-Holstein that the Germans took when they fought the Danes in 1864 is going to go back to Denmark. So they lose a little piece to Denmark. The city of Memel becomes Klaipėda and goes to the Lithuanians. A big piece of Silesian is going to go to Poland. A piece of Pommern is going to go to Poland. A piece of Prussia is going to go to Poland. And then a piece of Prussia is carved out around the city of Danzig. Danzig becomes a free city, so it becomes Danzig Freistadt. The reason why Versailles decided to do this was Poland needed to have its own port city. Otherwise, it was going to basically be landlocked. It did, by the Vistula River, it did touch the Baltic Sea, but there was no city there. So to compensate for that, they made Danzig not be part of Germany. It would be its own separate state. And then Poland would have this neutral city to use as its port. It would be ruled by ethnic Germans living in Danzig, but it wouldn't be Germany. On the western side, Alsace-Lorraine, which was taken from France in 1871, but was ethnically German. It has cities like Metz and Strasbourg. It's a German area. It still is. If you go there and you speak German, you'll be fine. If you speak French, you'll be fine too, because everybody's bilingual. Actually, they're trilingual, because the whole planet now speaks English. It's a little exaggerated, but it's not that exaggerated. So that chunk of land, which is ethnically German, that the Germans took in 1871 now is going to go back to France. The poor thing was like they had it on wheels. It would pop out of France and go to Germany and then go back to France. It's terrible. It's very sad. Chunk of land goes to Belgium. In other words, they took a knife and they carved off pieces of land from Germany. In addition, they took all of its colonies away. So Tanganyika goes to the British, well, minus Rwanda and Burundi, that goes to the Belgians. Sud-West Africa, which is today Namibia, will go to the British. The British give it to South Africa to rule. The Solomon Islands are going to go to the British. Papua New Guinea becomes a single entity. Well, not that point. It actually went, the northern part of the state ended up going to the Japanese. After World War II, they'll make it a single entity by merging it together. But initially, they actually gave it to Australia. Like, the whole thing's a mess. Germany just gets carved up. Its colonies are taken away, and parts of Europe are taken away. Then, there's the Treaty of Saint-Germain for the Austrians. The Austrians are prohibited from ever merging with Germany, and they have to rename themselves. So the Republic of German Austria becomes the Republic of Austria. They're forced to dump the word German, because the fear is that if Germany gets Austria, it's just that much more, which will allow Germany to be that much more powerful and make it that much more likely that Germany will get on its feet someday. The British don't want Germany to get on its feet, ever. They want Germany down. So they make sure Austria can't merge with Germany. So its whole goal of, we'll become Germany, Austria, we'll operate until we're ready, and then we'll merge, that's off the table. The majority of Austrians were upset about this. The majority of Austrians did want to merge with Germany. I bet if you did a poll today, that's not necessarily the case. But at that point, it was. In addition to that, Sudetenland, the thin strip that went into what is today the Czech Republic, will be carved off and given to Czechoslovakia. The cities like Pilsen will go to Czechoslovakia. And then Südtirol and what is today the very northern eastern chunk of Italy, that'll go to Italy. That's taken off. And a piece of Carniola will then be carved off and given to Slovenia. So Austria will be a little bit smaller as well. It gets a little shrunk. And then that's how those two states are going to have to operate going forward. In addition, they had limited military sizes. I don't remember what Germany's, was it 100,000? It was a small military. And then I think Austria was limited to 30,000, something like that. So they're essentially disarmed. Oh, one more fun thing about Germany, the Rhineland. The part of Germany that will remain in Germany that's west of the Rhine River, that will be occupied by a French army, basically probably for all eternity. So that if Germany ever does try to attack France again in the future, they're going to have to fight in Germany first to get to France. And they're going to have to attack by crossing the Rhine River, and the French army will be right there. So this is also a humiliation for the Germans to have this French army parked in their land. It also, by the way, stokes German racism. Because the French, have you ever seen the French soccer team, like for the World Cup? It's the Pan-Africa team. The best players from Africa play for France. There's always like at least one or two white guys on the French team. Everybody else is brown and black. It's amazing. It's incredible. Well, the French army wasn't much different. The French had no problem bringing Senegalese and Algerians and putting them in combat and having them fight for them. So when they made the occupation army for the Rhineland, they brought all these Africans. Some of them were North Africans and they were Arab, and some of them were Sub-Saharan Africans and they were black, and they brought them in. Well, I don't know if you all know this, but occupation armies have sex with the locals. That's just a thing. There has never, ever been an exception to this in the history of humankind. Isn't that crazy, though? You wouldn't think that would be a thing, but it totally is. So as time starts to go by, there starts to be these little half-German, half-African kids popping up in the Rhineland. Full disclosure, I'm part German. I lived in Germany. I don't have German citizenship. I'm not eligible for it. I might be eligible for Austrian citizenship. I've never pursued it. So just so you know, I do have a bias in this. But I had a friend when I lived in Germany, Elisabeth, and she was definitely a Rhine product. She was a very cool person, very wonderful, lovely person. But anyway, this was a real thing, and it did tick away at that German nationalist, that German racist thing of, oh God, the French have brought these Africans and they've parked them here to have sex with our women and they're making little babies. It was driving them nuts. So, having said all that, there is a twist, and the twist is the United States. We enter the war late, of course, because that's what we like to do. We came 75% of the way in. That way, right, we can pick up the winnings, but without really paying the full price. It's genius. We wait for World War II to be half over. We let World War I be 3/4 over. But I'm not being sarcastic. That's really the way you want to do this. Like, that's genius. Go late. Go late, you get the rewards, but you didn't get the deaths. Woodrow Wilson says something really amazing. He says that every nation should have the right to self-determination. And so he plants the seed that Poland should exist. Because in the centuries prior, at one point there was a Polish empire. There was actually also a Lithuanian empire. This is like completely insane. And at one point, Poland and Lithuania were competing with each other. And at one point, they even merged. At one point, strangely enough, a Swedish king ended up ruling Poland. Like there's a really rich, crazy history there. And there was this massive Polish state at one point in history between, because normally I think as a general rule, you don't put your country between Germany and Russia. Like as a general rule, you go, where's a good spot? You don't pick that one. But Poland pulled it off for centuries. They did fine, just fine. But history did catch up with them. Austria, the Prussians, and the Russians slowly, little by little, carved up Poland until they made it disappear. Napoleon decided he was going to bring Poland back, and he did. He carved Poland out of those three countries in his wars. Poland came back into existence, Napoleon's defeated, and Poland disappeared again. So it's the end of World War I, and Woodrow Wilson's going, self-determination. Poland has a right to exist. It's got an army in the field. It's actually actively fighting its neighbors, and he's there saying, no, this is right. We need this to happen. And there should be a Bulgaria, and there should be a Yugoslavia, and a Czechoslovakia. Those states that used to be under the rule of Germans in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, they deserve to be separate and free. And even the states that were Russian. And so this is a really huge contradiction to the type of European imperialism that had been taking place up until that moment. And the world decides, yeah, that makes sense for white people. Because Woodrow Wilson didn't mean this for India. He clearly didn't mean this for North Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa or East Asia or anywhere else. He clearly just meant it for Poland. And so that's one of the things on the table. To help make this happen and to facilitate this, we have to have conferences because we need to see if we can stop the wars and come up with some peaceful solutions so that we can get out of this World War I mode. And so in addition to having Germany and Austria and the Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria surrender, he says, what if we created an institution, a permanent institution, that would just hang out and prevent wars? We could, when we have a difference, we could get together and hash out the differences, and we don't have to keep doing war, and maybe even world wars. Like the Great War can be the last war that's a world war. And the idea he comes up with is, of course, the League of Nations. And so that's why the League of Nations is founded in January of 1920. He signs the treaty. The British, the French, the Japanese. By the way, Japan was on the Allied side in World War I. Italy was on the Allied side in World War I. They'll obviously switch sides in World War II, but in World War I, they were on the British side. Those guys are all going to sit down and sign this treaty. The Soviet Union is not allowed to do it because, well, they're communist. So they can't join the League of Nations. Right there, you've just kind of broken the League of Nations. Here's this big state that you hate that's pariah. You're not letting them join. The whole idea is to prevent a war down the road. Right? You've just screwed yourself up by saying, no, not them. Germany is not allowed to join the League of Nations. Like, really? You're not letting Germany, like, isn't the problem that you're worried there's going to be another world war and it's going to be against Germany at some point? Don't you want them going and talking? Woodrow Wilson feels glorious because he's had this brilliant idea. He comes back, he's talking to the KKK members that are part of his government. He was totally well connected to the KKK. During his administration, the KKK would do marches in Washington, D.C. because they felt welcome because their guy was in the White House. Officially, he was never a member, but you know, when all your friends are members, probably. Just you know, when you're looking at the crowd pass by with the pointy little white hats, and you're going, there are good guys on both sides. You know what I'm saying? That type of equivocating probably leads you in that direction. So Woodrow Wilson comes back, he's all celebrating, and he goes to the Senate to get approval to sign this treaty so the United States will join the League of Nations, and the Republicans go no. And he goes, what? This is our glorious moment. We're creating an organization that's going to avoid war in the future, and it's my idea. The United States gets credit for it. And they're like, yeah, you need our votes. We're saying no, you're not going to join. We're not letting the United States into the League of Nations, your creation. He loses his mind over this. He's basically shouting and screaming at them, trying to force them to do it. They go, nope, and we don't join. The United States, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and the Weimar Republic of Germany don't join. It's doomed from its birth. How can it possibly work when it's missing 3 of the world's superpowers? Having said that, something else is going on. There wasn't just a communist revolution in Russia. There were actually more. For example, Mongolia had a communist revolution. And to make things even more interesting, the new state after the Bolsheviks take over, it's the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, the RSFSR. That state, that communist state, has the idea that it should more or less try to put itself back together. That it should bring the Russian Empire back as much as it can. It'll just be communist instead of imperialist. And so they begin working on Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan. They're working on Georgia. They're working on Armenia. They're working on Azerbaijan. They're trying to get them back in. And they're also working on Belarus and Ukraine. For the most part, they're ignoring Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. They're fighting the Poles. By the way, Poland wins. In 1921, the Soviets sign a surrender treaty with Poland. Poland beat the Germans beat Poland, and then the Germans beat Russia, and then the Poles turn around and beat Russia. It's hilarious. Like, ooh, how? Wow, Poland really did come back. And then, of course, Finland, they're just not even going to mess with that. It's gone. They're ready to let it go. They'll change their mind later, and they'll regret that. But for now, they're letting it go. So at that point, there's those states having their own little communist revolutions. Well, the British, the French, the United States, the Japanese, and for that matter, the Germans don't exactly like this. The war is over, the Germans have surrendered, they've had their army limited. A part of their army goes rogue and becomes the Freikorps. And they decide they're going to stay in Poland. They're going to stay in Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, and they're going to fight. And they do. And then the British, the United States, the French, and the Japanese decide that we're going to foment and support a civil war to try to bring down the communist government in the Soviet Union. And so they plunge into a civil war, and we invade. The United States invades by Vladivostok. The Far Eastern Republic breaks away from Russia, and we support it. The Japanese are pumping money into those guys as well. The French and the British come in from the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea, and they're trying to support the white Russians. The red Russians are the communists, the white Russians are the guys fighting the communists and trying to restore the monarchy. And we're on the side of restoring the monarchy. In the midst of all of this, there's a Czech army in the middle of Russia. The Czech army in World War I left for the Allies to see if they could help break Czechoslovakia out of Austria-Hungary. The problem was they couldn't get to the Allies by going west because they would have had to march through Germany. There was no way this little Czech army was going to get through Germany. Germany just would have wiped it out. So they thought their only way to get to France, because that's their goal, they want to get to France, was for them to march not through Germany, but the other way. They were going to go all the way to Siberia, all the way through Siberia to the Pacific Ocean, get on ships, sail to the United States. Then they were going to cross the United States, get back on ships, and sail across the Atlantic Ocean and land in France and join the fight against Austria, which they had just left by fighting the Germans. Well, by the time World War I ended, they were in the middle of Russia. They were doing it, it's just war had ended. Well, that's where the Russian royal family was, and they went, oh, if there's a civil war, let's get involved. They began marching towards the Russian royal family, and the communists who had control of them feared if the Czechs got them and then joined the civil war, they would have royals they could try to prop into place, and maybe they could rally Russians who were not interested in communism or capitalism or any of that, but they were interested in the monarchy. And so they shot them to death. And so that's how the royal family dies. It's to prevent the Czechs from capturing them. The Czechs who are on their way to France by literally looping the planet. It would have taken them years, but they would have made it because they were that kind of folk. The fact that they even thought they could pull it off tells you all you need to know about them, right? Like if we could have like 1,000 of those guys just work our government, it would be streamlined, smooth, and perfect because they had imagination and determination. It's incredible. Anyway, so that's starting to happen, but at the same time, something else is happening. Germany has a communist revolution. Okay, so you need to know a little bit of background on this. At the end of the 19th century, so 1880s, the German Socialist Party was in the midst of a really nasty argument. The argument was so nasty, the German Socialist Party looked like it was going to split in two. And if you do that, you're done, right? Like your only chance to succeed is to work together as a group. Once you've divided and now you work against each other, there's no possibility of a socialist Germany. It's off the table. So they decide, you know what, instead of doing this and tearing ourselves to pieces, we have an idea. Karl Marx is in exile in London. He's old, but he's still alive. What if we let him decide what we should do next? And they agree to it. So they basically bring in an outside arbitrator to figure out what to do next. Here's what the argument was about. Russian socialists had showed up to Germany and said, we're dying in Russia. We're getting nowhere. We don't know what to do. We need your help. Half the German socialists went, yeah, of course we have to help you. You're our socialist brothers and sisters. What can we do? The other half of the German socialists went, are you kidding? Russia is the armpit backwater of Europe. It's the part of Europe that will never become socialist because they'll still be feudal in 1,000 years. There's no hope for Russia. Any resources we apply to Russia will be wasted, and those are resources we need here so we can win in Germany. And that's what they're about to split over. So they asked Marx to intervene. Marx goes, give me like a couple of years to rule on this. Don't break up, stop arguing, shelve this. I'll get back to you in 2 years. They go, okay. The first year he spends in the London Library, London Public Library, teaching himself Russian. I didn't know that was a thing. You just like, you know what, I want to learn a new language. And you just go teach yourself a new language. That was the second year he spent marking up all the library books. They were furious at him. They were like, dude, you're smashing it. Now those are like worth millions of dollars because they have Marx's writing all over it. But at the time they were livid. They couldn't believe this guy was vandalizing their books. He read every book he could find, every article he could find on Russian socialism in Russian. so that he would be an expert, so he could make a ruling. Here's what his ruling was. It's true, Russia really is backwards, like centuries backwards. It's so backwards, if you travel to Russia, you get set back 13 days, because even their calendar is backwards. Like you don't just change time zone, you change year zone. You know what I mean? Like you're in a different day. So the October Revolution took place in November. The February Revolution took place in March. Like it's that. So Marx is like, yeah, the guys who are arguing that Russia is this backwater, they're not wrong. But the guys who are arguing you can't abandon your socialist brethren are also not wrong. So here's what you guys need to do. You're gonna have revolutions, not to become socialist, because Karl Marx didn't think you could become socialist through a revolution, but to change the government to open the pathway to become socialist. So he said in a state like the United States or Great Britain, where we have elections, there's no need for a revolution. All you have to do is figure out how to convince the working class that they have numerical superiority, and once they do, they'll start to vote in their own best interests, and then that'll take you down a socialist path. That's what he believed would happen in the United States and Great Britain. But in a state like Germany or Russia, where they were extremely corrupt, decadent, terrible governments, you're gonna have to have a revolution to clear the way. So he told the Germans and the Russians, have a revolution at the same time. So that's an amazing statement. How do you control when you have a revolution? Like that's just a thing that happens. How? It's not possible. But that's the goal. And then merge and create a German-Russian superstate. Then Germany, with all its technology, all its advanced bureaucracy, all its industrial might, will rapidly industrialize the Russians and pull Russia out of the feudal system that it's in and bring it into modernity and maybe even get it to change its calendar. And then the two states can transition slowly, hand in hand together, from a capitalist system to a socialist system. And everybody goes, okay, yeah, for a while. They decide to break up anyway. You know how it is. You want the divorce, you see the marriage counselor, but you get the divorce anyway. That's what happens. The reason is because of the length of time they think it'll take. Socialists believe that this process will take a long time, centuries. And capitalism might be appropriate right now, so a good socialist, if capitalism is appropriate right now, operates like a capitalist. And then at some point down the road, you've transitioned enough through a democratic process that you become like Sweden, a capitalist socialist hybrid state. And then in maybe 1,000 years, you become some kind of anarcho-socialist utopia. The other ideology are the communists. They go, no, we don't want to wait 1,000 years to become an anarcho-socialist utopia. Let's do it right here, right now. But then there's the question, how do you get the kind of maturity required to have that kind of utopian state? And the communist answer is violent revolution. We'll use the revolution not to create the pathway so that we can slowly evolve into socialism over centuries. We'll use the revolution to forcibly transition society into this new socialist utopia. And that becomes the split between communists and socialists. Lenin, of course, is a communist. He believes that can be done. You just need the revolution. So the February Revolution, which took place in March of 1917, was actually a socialist revolution. The Bolshevik Revolution, which took place in November, the October Revolution that took place in November of 1917, was the communists overthrowing the socialists. Isn't that wild? That's the split that takes place there. Well, as World War I is calming down, but we haven't yet gotten to Germany's surrender, January, and I think the date is January 7, but don't quote me on that. In January of 1919, so the armistice was in November, Berlin fell to the communists. So there's already been a communist government since November of 1917 in Russia. So they immediately call the Berlin communists. Think about this. Berlin goes down. Berlin was Germany's LA, New York, and Washington, D.C. combined. This is a catastrophe for the German state. It just lost not only its largest city and its capital, but its cultural and economic center, and its industrial center on top of it all. So the German state is reeling. There's these two communists, Rosa Luxemburg is one of them, that are actually running Berlin as its own little separate little communist state. And the Russians are like, oh my God, you finally did the revolution. We've been sitting here waiting for you so we can merge. Because they never gave up the idea. And Rosa Luxemburg's on the phone going, dude, what the hell are you talking about? We're getting massacred out here. We're fighting the German army. Do you know what that's like? And the Russians are like, yeah, we surrendered. That sucks. Good luck. Well, when you're done and you win, call us. And like the Russians call back the next day. Did you win yet? It's been one day. The next day, did you win yet? No, we're actually losing, I think. This goes on for about 7 days. Finally, the Russians call on the 7th day and they're like, did you win yet? And Rosa Luxemburg's like, actually, right now I'm gonna have to hang up in just a second, but I'm about to be escorted out to be shot by firing squad. No, we lost. Bye. And that was it, 7 days. Berlin went communist for 7 days. But then crazily enough, a few months later, Bavaria goes. In April of 1919, the Bavarian Soviet Republic is created. But the second largest state in Germany went communist and breaks away from the German state and goes its own for like 27 days and gets reabsorbed back into the German state. It didn't quite last. But as that's happening, Hungary goes communist. There's a guy named Bela Kun. He's actually technically the Hungarian foreign minister. He wasn't the head of state, but he's the guy who ends up running the Hungarian Soviet Republic for 133 days. And then it goes down in a ball of flames. But anyway, this is the type of chaos that Europe's coming out of World War I into. There's revolutions breaking out, there's little wars breaking out, there's rogue armies like the Freikorps that won't sit down, they can't wait to keep fighting. There's little statelets popping up all over the place and declaring their independence. It's a nightmare. And part of the problem is that the British and the French aren't managing the German surrender properly. They're so intent on revenge that they're making it certain there will be a World War II. They're setting it up. So to be clear, World War II really is just Germany's fault. I don't want to take responsibility away from Germany, but Hitler might not have gotten into power if Germany wasn't so severely punished. In other words, had the British and the French managed this a little bit better, it probably wouldn't have meant that we had to do World War II. Like, it's hard for me to imagine a world without a World War II, but I think that's because World War II did such a landscape shaping event, like it completely changed everything, that, from this position it looks like it was an inevitability. But in that moment, I don't think it was. I think the inevitability was because the British and the French really screwed this up. So, the German state has now got a problem because the Kaiser has abdicated and Deutsches Reich, the German Empire, is gone. So there's no point in pretending. So they want to just go ahead and call it a republic and try to figure out how they can make this work going forward. In addition, the Germans made a really strange mistake. Actually, before I do the strange mistake, it's not that strange of a mistake, actually, now that I think about it. They make a mistake. It's a silly mistake, too. But before I do that, one of the problems that they have is they're trying to form a new government. They can't form it in Berlin because the communists have it. So they form it in a town called Weimar. That's why it's called the Weimar Republic. Because they're in this weird situation where their capital is in chaos, so they don't actually make their new government in their capital. They make it somewhere else, and then they transition it to the capital. So the mistake they made was in World War I, and it'll haunt them. So in World War I, France implemented its first ever income tax. It made the French people pay for World War I. Germany went, we'll win this thing. There's no way anybody's going to beat us. So let's not do that. Let's just run up a psychotic debt. then once we're on the other side, we'll make the British and the French and the Russians pay reparations, and we'll use the reparations to pay down our psychotic debt, right? Only a completely insane, irresponsible society runs up a really big debt. Like normal thinking human beings might run up a moderate debt for a period of time, but not like, $34 trillion or something stupid like that. That's insane. That's maniacal, especially when your GDP is smaller. So Germany does this. They lose the war, so they come out on the other side with no way to pay down their debt. Then on top of it all, the tone-deaf British and French who don't get what's really happening in the world, because they're so arrogant and narcissistic, and they're so hell-bent on plundering brown and black people in the rest of the world, they decide they're going to make Germany pay for World War I. They decide to do to Germany what Germany was planning to do to them, and makes Germany pay the reparations. So Germany comes out of the war with massive debt, and on top of it all, this new debt that the British and the French have loaded on top of them. And they have no colonial empires to plunder to pay the debt off with either. So they can't cheat like the British and the French are doing. So Germany starts printing money. That's always a bad idea. They start printing money. Now there's the general understanding, the conventional wisdom on this. By the way, conventional wisdom is an insult. Conventional wisdom means it's almost certainly wrong. People misuse conventional wisdom. I actually don't know if this is wrong, so maybe it's right. But the conventional wisdom is Germany intentionally was printing the money because if they could create inflation, it would effectively make the debt payments meaningless. It's true. So right now, if you're a homeowner and you have a mortgage payment and your income rose at the rate the inflation rate just rose, you should be doing a little jig, right? Like, I don't know what the inflation rate was over the last 3 years, but let's say altogether each year combined, it was 20%. I don't think it was that high, but let's just say it's right around 20%. Well, as long as your income rose by 20%, that just offset the inflation. But 20%, if you had a $400,000 mortgage that you're paying, it's only worth $320 now. You just got $80,000 put in your pocket. All inflation isn't bad. The inflation that's not great, the poopy inflation, is the inflation rose and your pay didn't rise. That's not happy. That's sad, right? So if that happened to you, I get why you'd be a little grumpy. Unless, of course, you were making a lot of money, in which case it's like, just shut up, change your lifestyle a little bit. But if you're making $30,000 before the inflation and you're making $30,000 after the inflation, you're actually now making $24,000. Yeah, that would make me grumpy too. But if you're a person with a little bit of debt, that's not the worst thing to ever happen. So in other words, I'm just going to out myself. I was rooting for a little bit of high inflation. We're going to do this? Okay, cool. Let's say you own $33 trillion in debt. 20% just went away. Is not the worst answer I've ever heard in my life. So it could be the Germans were intentionally printing money in the beginning to bring down the value of the debt they owed. They're literally making it disappear. The problem is the rate at which it starts to happen, there's no way they meant for it to go that path. So in other words, when the war started, it was 4 marks to the US dollar. When the war ended, it was 8 marks to the US dollar. By the time we got to 1921, it was like 7,000 marks to the US dollar. By the time we got to like 1922, it was something like 1 million marks to the US dollar. I actually have a postage stamp. It's 280 million marks. It cost 280 million marks, about 70 million US dollars to send a letter. People were getting their life savings sent to them in the form of a postage stamp. And it would say, here's your $30,000 life savings back. You can use it to send an envelope. It's not worth us keeping it in the bank. By 1923, 1 trillion marks to the dollar. They lost absolute control. They obliterated their economy. So here they are, they're coming out of World War I, and they plunge into this nightmare. There's an author who talks about an account. So you had to be paid by the day, right? Because forget week, forget month. If you're paid on Tuesday and you don't spend that money on Tuesday, on Wednesday, it's worthless. So you just lost your pay from Tuesday. So they were literally paid, workers were paid by the day, and you take wheelbarrows to work because they're just piling, like they stopped counting. They would weigh the money. They'd be like, and they just dump it in your wheelbarrow and you hoped it was close. So this one guy, he's got his stupid wheelbarrow and he goes to the grocery store. You can't take the wheelbarrow in the grocery stores because these are European grocery stores, they're small. If everybody has their stupid wheelbarrow in the grocery store, it's not gonna fit, right? It's not like here where we have little silver bison and we push them around. It's so exciting. I mean, they have grocery carts in Europe. Wheelbarrows are too much. Anyway, so this guy's got his wheelbarrow, and he's like, he leaves it outside. He scoops up a pile of money, leaving most of the money in the wheelbarrow. He does his grocery shopping. When he's done, he just dumps the money on the counter. The cashier's like, whatever. He just shoves it onto the floor. The guy walks away with his groceries, comes outside, and to his shock, horror, and dismay, he finds that somebody has stolen the wheelbarrow. They literally dumped the money in the street and walked away with the wheelbarrow. That's how worthless the mark had become. It was a disaster of epic proportions. And it sets in everybody's mind, oh my God, who's ruling this country? What's happening? Did none of this ever happen when we had a Kaiser? Maybe republics are a bad idea. Maybe democracy isn't the answer. Maybe we need to rethink the path we're on. In other words, this is bad timing. And rebellions are still happening. The city of Hamburg, Germany goes into full-fledged rebellion. They are battles with workers. The workers go into, it's a socialist workers' rebellion. They're actually in the streets with firearms shooting at the German police and the German military that shows up to help the police. And at one point, the workers actually took a truck and they took boiler plating and they welded it on and they made an armored car. And so there's literally a worker armored car in combat with German police armored cars. It looks like war in Hamburg in 1923. The workers lost. Anyway, but you can still dream. You can still dream. In the middle of all this, a new ideology is created. There's this socialist guy from Italy whose parents were socialists. Turns out ideology is largely passed on from generation to generation, in case you hadn't figured that out. So if you hate your parents right now, watch where you are in 40 years. Just heads up, heads up. I find every once in a while I'll be like, oh God, my dad would have done that. And it's really a big letdown, but it's okay, it's okay. Anyway, so don't get me wrong, I kind of admire my dad, but I didn't want to be him. You know what I mean? You don't. Y'all don't have a bad relationship with your dad? Like, what the heck?
I don't want to be either of them, and I refuse because they want a different career out of me. So.
Okay. So this socialist does something wrong, very wrong. His parents, who were socialists, fell in love with Benito Juarez, as in the Mexican guy, Benito Juarez, and as in the city that Ciudad Juarez is named after, that guy. And then named their son Benito Mussolini. Mussolini is an editor for the Milano Socialist newspaper. He's that guy. Italy when World War I breaks out, doesn't jump in because they've got the same idea we do. Let's wait, see how this is rolling out, and then we'll pick a side. We'll come in at the end and get the victory. The Italians pulled the trigger too early and attacked in 1915. They should have waited to 17. But anyway, they do it that way. Well, Mussolini does something that kind of shakes his party, and they throw him out. The socialists had decided World War I was anathema. Because this is going to sound crazy, the socialists were internationalists. They believed everybody was equally worthless. I mean, everybody was equally worthwhile. And that there was no nation better than any other nation. So a war was just a way that the capitalists would use the working class to kill itself so that the capitalists could get bigger gains. So the hope was, when World War I was breaking out, the socialist hope, was that the armies would march out, they'd look at each other, and they'd recognize a fellow factory worker or a fellow peasant on the other side, and they'd be like, I don't want to shoot that 18-year-old kid that looks just like me and has the same crappy job I do. And they would turn around and shoot their officers, kill them, and then march back into their country, overthrow their governments, and end the corrupt capitalist system and install something more like Sweden. That's what they thought was going to happen. The soldiers got out there, they took a look at each other and started shooting and murderizing each other, and it looked like there was just joy in the process. And it broke the socialist mind because they couldn't believe how stupid the proletariat really was. They couldn't believe that these dumbass peasants and these stupid factory workers were willing to kill each other to benefit a handful of really rich, awful, evil people who had stuck them in the factories to begin with. There was Mussolini going, yes, this is it, do it. Italy should jump into the war. We need a piece of the pie. The socialists go, we hate you, get out. And they kick them out. So when the war ends, Mussolini decides he really likes the idea of being in power. So he needs an ideology. So here's what he comes up with. The problem isn't capitalism necessarily. It's not a good system, but it's not the evil that the socialists say it is. The problem isn't the rich either. The problem isn't the poor. They're good people too. The working class is wonderful. I love the working class. The uneducated, they're all great. Can't wait to hang out with them. The problem is modernity. Today sucks. Factories suck. You want to know why World War I sucks so badly? Factories. Because in factories you build artillery pieces. In factories you build tanks. In factories you build airplanes. In factories you build shells. World War I was trench warfare. It was a nightmare. For like quality of life, I'm pretty sure World War I was the worst war in human history for quality of life for soldiers. World War II was really bad for civilians because one of the things the soldiers were not going to do is get in those stupid trenches. They were like, you want to do another world war? Okay, we're going to do it in your house. But World War I for soldiers, there are all these vets that have come out of World War I where they were in the trenches. So the trenches are a nightmare, not just because it's war, it's weird war. You go in the trench, it's 10 feet deep, 3 meters deep. So you can't shoot out of it. They put ladders, but you pop your head up over the top and there's a jackass on the other side shooting you in the head. So you just basically wanted to lay low. And anyway, they're in a trench anyway, so even if you had a machine gun and you set it up and you shot all day, you're never going to kill anybody unless they're idiots and they pop their head out of the trench because the bullets can't fall into the trench. It's like a meter wide trench, 3 meters deep. How is the bullet going to get to you? So if I can't shoot you out of your trench, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up artillery a couple of miles away and I'm going to drop artillery shells on your trench all day and try and kill you that way. So that meant that you as a soldier, your job was to just not die. You can't kill the other side. There's nothing you can do in the trench except just try not to die. But how do you have any control over that? You don't know where the next shell is going to land. And it's constant. So it's boom, 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 boom. And your mind breaks after a while. You will end up with PTSD. There's no way around it. Because think about it. our species evolved as prey. We're weird. We're not lions who evolved into a sentient being. We were the thing the lions were eating that evolved into a sentient being. So we're prey. Isn't that weird? We're prey with predator features, which is also weird, but it's because we were in trees. Our eyes are on the front of our face. Predators have their eyes on the front of their face. Our eyes weren't on the front of our face because we were predators. It was so that you could tell distance. That's why predators need to have their eyes on the front of their face. Because when you're a cat and you're leaping through the air to catch the gazelle, you don't want to misjudge that distance. You'll miss the animal. If you're a monkey and you're jumping from branch to branch, you don't want to misjudge that distance. You'll fall to the ground and a lion will eat you. So, in other words, we accidentally ended up with some really cool predator features. And then, to get the big brain, we began cooking our food and eating meat. So we needed to develop predator teeth. So we have predator front teeth for chewing through meat. And then we have herbivore back teeth. Isn't that weird? So we have the psychology of prey. We don't have the psychology of predator. Think about us. We're nervous, we're fidgety, we're always self-conscious. That's what prey experience, because they're worried something's going to sneak up on them and eat them. Predators, they laze around most of the day. When they get hungry, they stalk their enemy. They're filled with confidence and certainty. They're probably going to miss their prey more times than they get it. But they're in the position of not having to live in fear. But we're the species that lives in fear, and then we took our prey mentality into civil interactions, and we're petty and cruel and sadistic. Because we're scared. That's what scared people do. We're compensating. But think about it. You're there, you're on the ground, there's a cougar coming at you. It's probably about 30, 60 seconds of terror, right? Because your instinct is run to the first tree. That guy can climb the tree too, but if you're on top, you clearly have an advantage. And you can probably go higher because you're smaller. And so even once the branches are starting to get a little flimsy, you're probably okay. It's going to have trouble. In 30 to 60 seconds, the situation's been decided. You either got up the tree and got away, or it's dragging your corpse into a cave to eat you. Not 24 hours of shells dropping on your head. We did not evolve for that. So when World War I ends, there's all these veterans, plus there was no tour of duty, right? So if you were there in August 1914, you could serve all the way to November 1918. It never occurred to anybody that 50 months of this is not okay for the human psyche. But honestly, I think 1 month of it wouldn't have been. Now you're expected to work in a factory. So you show up. Here's a twist. It was better to be a US soldier. You might have experienced the exact same level of terror. Like, let's say you arrived in France in spring of 1918, and there's a German or a Brit or a French guy who also got there in spring of 1918. So it's the same moment, and you fight to November. So you spent the same amount of time, and let's say your units were next to each other, so you're in the same place. But to get back home, wherever it is, Texas, Indiana, New York, you had to walk to the nearest port. That's going to take a couple of weeks. You wait for the next ship to pick you up. That's going to take a week. You get on the ship. It's 2 weeks to New York. You might not catch a train for a few days. You get on a train. By the time you get back home, it's been a month, 2 months, 3 months. And a lot of that travel you were doing with fellow veterans who had just gone through this. You had a chance to decompress. You're a German coming off the front line, you're home the same day. You have no time to decompress. You show up, you're a mouth to feed. The first thing out of everybody's mouth when you enter that house, whether it's your wife, your children, your parents, your cousins, is when are you going to get a job? You walk into that factory, you hear gong, gong, gong in this closed, confined space. You're in PTSD zone. Some people made the transition. There were whole mobs of veterans who just couldn't get into the factories. Mussolini goes, "You're not wrong. The problem is modernity. We've got to get rid of it. World War III should be fought with spears and bows and arrows. We need to bring back Rome, Rome's glory. We need to reconquer the Mediterranean. What we need to do is make it so that there's a Roman Empire. And then that way, the kind of suffering we just experienced will never happen again. Women will know their place. There will be a order, a political order, a national order. Italy will be at the top of the world again. So all we have to do is prepare and plan for World War II. We need to build new factories so we can build more planes and more bombs, more artillery pieces, and more machine guns. Then we're going to do World War II. We'll win. When we win, we'll forcibly deindustrialize the whole planet. And then that way, World War III will be with spears and bows and arrows. That's the goal.
Well,
Make Italy great again. Make Rome great again. Isn't that cool? By its nature, his new ideology, fascism, appeals to the lower class because it talks about all the suffering that they have. And then it actually sets up the upper class because the upper class asks a really interesting question. Wait a minute, I'm an industrialist. I've made my money off the factories. What's my future? Why would I support you? And he goes, you'll be the nobles on the other side. You'll be the patrician class for the new Roman state. You support me here now, and I will bring you through to the other side, and people will peel grapes for you and carry you around on lectica and fan you. You'll be fine, don't worry about it. And then he marches on Rome, and in 1922, he takes over Italy. His ideology works just enough that he manages to mobilize a huge population of the Italian veterans, and they actually successfully pull off a coup and take over the Kingdom of Italy. It'll become the Republic after World War II. The Kingdom of Italy. Vittorio Emanuele, he's still the king, but Mussolini's in charge. Il Duce, the leader, that's his name, his title. And of course, somebody else gets inspired. Somebody goes, oh, I like that. That's very cool. So, there is this corporal who had been fighting in World War I. He joined in August 1914. In fact, there's a picture of the square in Munich when it's announced that World War I has just started, and his face is there. They captured the picture of him by accident. Nobody knew who this stupid corporal was. He wasn't even a corporal because he hadn't even joined the army. When he joins, he becomes a private. He just made corporal by the time the 50 months he served were over. Like, he flew up the chain of command quickly to get to corporal in 4 years and 2 months. That's incredible. Who does that? I'm probably being sarcastic. He's smiling. He couldn't wait to do World War I. Isn't that eerie? Of course, I'm talking about Adolf Hitler. He wanted to be an artist. He was a vegetarian. He couldn't draw human faces. Every art school said no. He joins the army because he doesn't know what to do. He moves to Germany. World War I breaks out. He's an Austrian. He moves to Germany. If you talk to Austrians, they'll claim he's German. This is an internal conflict I have with myself. And then he joins the German army and he fights and he makes it to rank of corporal. So I was taught that Guglielmo Marconi invented the radio. That's not true. It's not. I wish it was. Tesla invented the radio. Tesla is that cool. What Guglielmo Marconi did was he invented the antenna, which allowed you to not have to wire your radios together. Tesla's radios were connected by wire. Guglielmo Marconi's radios were connected by antenna. Guglielmo Marconi invented the antenna in 1920. So we went into World War I with radios that were wired together. So your Army command, you run a wire to that outpost, or run a wire to that outpost, run a wire down this trench, run a wire down that trench. The artillery barrage starts. What happened to all your wires?
Destroyed.
They are cut to pieces. How do I communicate with that outpost?
They can't.
What I do is I get a group of guys, 2, 3, 4 guys. Hopefully they were like track in high school or something. And I go, guess what? You guys are messenger runners. And then I write my message and I give it to the 3 guys and I tell them to go to the same place using 3 different routes. Right, because there's artillery shells coming down. Hopefully one of them will get there. They're literally running through a live artillery barrage. That was Hitler's job for 50 months. Messenger runners had a life expectancy of 2 months. He should have died 25 times, statistically. Isn't that awful? How did he get through that? When he did, he got through the other side and said, God spared me for something. I better come through. I better kill evil people like myself. And it's like, dude, if you're gonna do that, start with yourself. Like, why postpone that? Like, really, like, I hate to be that guy that encourages that, but really, like, that's your goal? I'll even help you out. I know it's illegal. Or, here's an alternative, buy his paintings. Somebody should have just bought his damn paintings. Somebody should have just let him into art school. Anyway, the German military is freaking out because there's all these random organizations popping up after the war, and they don't know that they can control this, and they're trying to think about how they create a stable Germany on the other side. And so what they did was they went and grabbed a bunch of Germans that they thought were good and loyal and solid, and they said, how do you feel about infiltrating these organizations and becoming spies for us to tell us what's going on the inside? Hitler will do this. He joins an organization called the German Workers' Party, Deutsche Arbeiterspartei. He joins it, and he's getting inspired by the leader of the organization. And one day he walks up to the guy. He was the 55th member, but they wanted to make their membership look big, so they just added a 5 to everything. So his membership number was 555. So he's that Antichrist. The next one will be 666, right? I think that's how that works. I'm pretty sure. Anyway, he says to the leader of the organization, do you mind if I jump up and, I don't know, make a speech and throw out some of my ideas? And the guy's like, yeah, sure, go ahead. I'll give you a run at it. He gets up, he makes the speech. He completely gets everybody in the crowd. And he's just hooked them. It's the cadence, the way he talks, the things he says. And he brings them in. And the leader walks up to him and goes, dude, you need to be the leader. And Hitler goes from being a spy to being the leader. He decides that the name isn't quite yet perfect. So he adds, Nationalsozialismus, Deutsche Arbeiterspartei, National Socialist German Workers' Party, National, Nazi for short, and that's how the Nazi Party is created. He will launch a coup d'etat from a beer garden in Germany during a beer festival. He's busted, it doesn't work, and he goes to prison. And he writes Mein Kampf from prison. He gets out of prison, and then they begin running for office. The NSDAP runs for office. He calls it National Socialist because it's a nationalist organization, and the idea is that it'll be socialism for the nation, not the individual. So the state he will create, the state he envisions, is that we will be a community of one, a homogenous community where everybody is basically the same in ideas, in appearance, in culture, the same perfect, pure Germanness, which is ironic because he didn't think he was. In fact, he believed he was half corrupt. He was half Jewish. So he believed it was his job to purge Germany of its impure non-Germanness, like himself. So, even though they're running for office, they're not doing great in the beginning. Then in 1930, they hit 18%. In 1932, in July, there's an election. They get 37%. They come in first place. They don't have enough people to form the government. You need a majority. The way you got the majority is you create a coalition government by going to the other parties, and you push yourself over the halfway mark. They can't do it. So they don't form government. In November of 1932, while the election is going on in the United States and FDR is going to win it, there's an election going on in Germany. Hitler is going to come in first place a second time. So in July in 32, they have the election. It goes nowhere. The government doesn't form, so they have to have a new election in November because they have to compensate for the fact that it didn't work. So when they do this new election, the Nazis actually lost votes. They went from 37% to 33%. Their popularity was actually fading. But everybody went, you know what, let's give this guy a chance, and he gets the coalition government. In other words, one of the great ironies is the year FDR is elected, the month FDR is elected is the month Hitler wins the election that gets him into power. They both end up in power in the beginning of the next year, 33, and they both die a few days apart in April of 45. Their two careers are like eerily, creepily paralleled. Anyway, so, okay, I've got this thing moving. There's still some pieces that I need to talk about, like with Germany and getting us a little bit further along. But at least I got us to the point where I've got the chaos. The economic woes haven't fully kicked in because I haven't described the Great Depression. But we got through the hyperinflation, so I'm feeling good. So the next part we'll probably start World War II, which you want to have happen. You want to get the killing going. You can't only postpone that so long. It'll be glorious. Yeah, so anyway, so thanks for coming. And it's so creepy.